Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Blaine Donoho. Coach Donoho is a graduate of Tennessee Tech with a bachelor's and master's degree in exercise science. Donoho interned at the collegiate and high school level before beginning his head coaching career at Good Pasture Christian School, eventually moving into the private sector, working with baseball, and eventually going to APG Strength. Donoho's current role at APG involves coaching and mentoring all disciplines of athletes from fifth grade to the pro level. On top of his career in the field, Coach Donoho serves on the Tennessee State Advisory Board for the NHSSCA. So on the show, Coach.
Really appreciate it, Stephen. Based on our few initial talks we've had before this, I've been super pumped to come on the show, man. You seem like a great dude. I've listened to the podcast a while, so I really appreciate you having me on, man. I'm super humbled by that.
Well, the verdict is out on whether I'm a great dude or not, but I do appreciate you sitting down and talking about this. We have a lot of people that we talk to in common, so it was a natural progression to finally sit down with you.
A lot of my boys have been on here. There's quite a few friends I have that are pretty much more than friends at this point. They're brothers to me in this field and in life in general. So it's been cool hearing them come on here and talk to you, and I'm again humbled that they even brought my name up to come on too.
Well, it was, I think, through Ross that I started meeting all these people, and me and Ross have gotten to be really good friends. And I think at the Texas NHSSCA NatCon kind of broke the ice with a few of your group, let's say.
Yep.
And it's been great for the show to have all those different ideas come on.
Ross is one of those guys, man, that it's really easy to become friends with him in the first 5 minutes you meet him, you know? But honestly, like I say that about Ross, pretty much all those guys are the exact same way, man. That's why we're so close. I think I already told you this, but like we started a group chat. It's been probably, I don't even know how long, man, but it's been at least 3 years ago now. It was like an initial group chat between like 2 or 3 of them that started probably 3.5, 4 years ago. And then we kept gradually adding a little bit more. I got thrown in eventually around like the 3-year mark, I guess. And so now like there's probably like 12 or 13 in that chat. It is legitimately the most active group chat I've ever been a part of. Like I'm talking every single day, kid you not, on a daily level, there's at least 50, sometimes 100 plus messages sent in a day by all those dudes. And some of it's about strength conditioning, some of it's about life in general, some of it's fun, some of it's, joking, some of it's serious. It's awesome, man. Like it's absolutely awesome. And then we all like get an Airbnb at the national conference and everything. And anytime any of us are going to any conference together, we always try to find a place together to stay. Dude, it's an awesome dynamic, man. I can't say enough about that group. They've helped me a lot get to where I am in my field today, but they've also helped me grow as a human being in general so much.
Since I've started doing this and get invited to places and going to meet people, that seems like that has helped me more than anything. You can read all the books you want. You can, do these podcasts, which help incredibly. But when you actually start going to these places and getting the real life glimpse of how things are working out, it definitely makes you a better coach.
Oh, 100%. I mean, listen, I love my collegiate experience. Tennessee Tech's a great school, great education. Honestly, not a very big school. From an educational standpoint, the exercise science department, pretty dang good. Like I think a lot of those professors over there, and I hear it's only getting better since I've left. All that is to say, I didn't learn half the stuff that I know now from the classroom. And I think that's kind of how it should be, to an extent. I've learned just by doing and seeing and experiencing and talking and listening. You got to kind of be placed into the fire and willingly put yourself in there to learn what to do in certain situations, because that's how you're going to learn it. You're not going to learn it any other way. You can't pick up a book and read about it. You can't listen to a lesson on how to do what. Like you just got to feel it, and you got to be in it, and you got to feel the struggle to know how to get out of the struggle. And that's a lot of this field, because everyone's situation is different, but everyone's situation is also a little bit the same in the sense of you're going to have your own personal struggles given your constraints of wherever you're at. But it's stuff that you're going to have to figure out on your own, because like I said, every place is different. Every athlete's different. All the coaching dynamics are different. It's different, but it's the same. You know what I mean?
With what you just said in there, that really dawned on me, because we're seeing AI being pushed more and more. And a lot of these jobs that we know today are going to be gone because AI can do it. And why pay somebody when you can look it up on your phone? AI is going to be the future tool that we can use, but at the end of the day, it will never have coach's eye. It can never replace us on the floor. This will be a job that goes on for eternity because we have to be there. So are you using AI to help in your day to day? And how is that going to affect you in the future?
I'm going to be honest. Like I do use it from time to time. I wouldn't say I use it in my day to day yet. Honestly, like I should probably utilize it more than I do, to be completely real with you, because it's a great tool. Like I'm there's no doubt about that. I'm not going to be the one that's like, no, I'm going to do it all on my own, no matter what. Like, no, like if the tool's there and it's available to me and it can help me, do things efficiently and more time efficient, because that's my thing. Like sometimes I'm not extremely efficient with my time. I know that about myself, so I probably should utilize it more to fix that part of me. But no, I wouldn't call it a part of my day to day yet. The primary thing I use it for right now is social media, especially like when I'm on like the APG account or something. If I'm trying to figure out exactly what I want to say in a caption, and I just want to make sure like I'm stating it in the clearest way possible while not going into too much detail, because that's my problem, man. Like I over explain and it starts to become like this big word vomit of jumbled nonsense. And it's like I have that problem with coaching too sometimes, honestly. I'll start to explain something to a group of athletes about why we do this, what it's supposed to feel like, what it's supposed to look like, da 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 da. And I'll almost get too into the weeds. And so by the time I'm done explaining, I look at the athletes and I'm like, all right, y'all got it. And they're like, sure, like, but no, that's the main thing I use it for, honestly, is to summarize my thoughts on social media posts to make it make sense to the general public, not just make sense in my brain, because sometimes the things that make sense in my brain don't make sense to the normal general public. And I'm not even saying that in a good way.
I think we have that in common. I've learned that AI will give you the SEO that you need to push your videos where you want them to go. They will collect your thoughts. It'll all be typed down. And if you know how to prompt it in the direction you want, it's still somewhat of an original thought. It's typing it out for you. So
100%.
I can agree with that. I think on top of having that in common, we have the private sector side in common, along with being a member of the NHSSCA, which I don't know how many of us there are that are in the private sector and are still members of the NHSSCA. But how have you managed to balance the two? Because we are a little bit of a rarity.
Yeah, and that's a good question, because I was about a year. Shoot, dude, I guess I'm about a year and a half removed from high school sector now. When I was still in the high school setting, I was on the Tennessee, NHSSCA advisory board, which our state director is Zach Fleming, who you've had Zach on, right? Yeah. So yeah, Zach. Zach's a great dude. Can't say enough good things about him, just like Ross and all those other guys. I actually texted Zach after I got out of high school and started going private, and I was like, hey, like, I just not thought about this, but am I still allowed to be on the advisory board? Like, even though I'm not in the high school setting, like, I don't know how that works. And his response was basically like, I don't know why you wouldn't be. You still work with high school athletes. And I was like, I mean, yeah, like, that's a good point. So whereas it is different, like, I'm not ever going to claim that it's the same, because like I said, I mean, I've been through both. There is major differences. The main similarity is the fact that the age of the athlete, the training age of the athlete, the dynamic of what they need and how I'm going to give it to them doesn't really change that much. So no, I that's why I'm still a part of the NHSSCA, besides the fact of, the networking and the things like that. Cause I mean, it's a great organization for things like that. But that's why I've kept my membership, even though I'm not in the high school setting, is because I'm still working with high school athletes in the same general format as I would if I were still at Good Pasture. I think there are some differences, but the similarities are the meat and potatoes are the same. Let's put it that way.
I would say that Zach Evanesh and Coach Quisenberry at Ravenwood did the same thing for me that Coach Fleming did for you. Was like, hey, you're working with high school athletes. At the end of the day, that's what we care about. And so making this decision has helped me tremendously get into some positions and talk to people that I never would have gotten that chance to do otherwise.
Yeah, 100%. No, and I've really enjoyed the private sector. It was kind of like a long-term goal for me to go private eventually. I didn't expect it to be this quick, but I'm really happy that it is. I mean, I'm very, very blessed to be where I am at APG. Shane and Alex Gibson, the co-owners, the husband and wife duo, they're phenomenal, incredible people. That's the main thing. They're 100% incredible, genuine Christian influences on my life, and so them being my employers as well is just a whole nother level of great. But all that accompanied by specifically Alex being a phenomenal strength coach. I mean, she is, dude, she's legit. She's actually a good one to have on here, honestly. She's been doing this for, shoot, I guess probably, I mean, I don't want to speak for her, but I think 10 plus years she's been doing this. So she's been doing it a little bit longer than I have. She's the Southeast director for the USR, the Universal Speed Rating, which is Les Spellman's kind of like entity that he created for like affiliations for his speed affiliates, right? The gyms that are his speed affiliates. She is phenomenal. Like I think I may have actually told you this too. This is the first time I've ever been on like a team where it's not just me trying to create my own thing, trying to use my ideas and see what works and what doesn't. Like it's all on me. This is the first time where I haven't been in that situation. Like I actually have people that I can talk to, programming, training, concerns, constraints, like whatever, talk through these things that have skin in the game and are smarter than me on a lot of stuff. And it is, that dynamic is unreal. Like I didn't realize how much I needed that or how much my life would improve until I had that. And so like being in that setting with her and with that whole team in general, because we've got another young coach, Audrey, that is, I believe she's only 19, maybe 20. She's just taken all this in. She's what I like to consider myself as is like a lifelong learner. She's the definition of that as well. Between the four of us, the dynamic is so different, but so intertwined because we're all looking to each other for different things and rely on each other for different things. It's just so cool, man. Like I can't even express how cool that dynamic is.
With where you are now, you work with a lot of baseball players. You've worked with a lot of baseball players in the past, and I'm only referencing that because baseball, softball kids, volleyball kids play a lot of games, and they play more games than they actually do strength training. And what I think I notice, and we'll see if you've noticed this or not, they almost develop body movement patterns that could be considered like right or left-handed. So when they go to squat, all of a sudden they're let's say they're left leg dominant, and they're going to shift all their weight to where essentially they're doing a unilateral squat. They're doing it all on one leg, and I tend to think that's from playing so many games and losing balance. But what have you seen with that?
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that, especially in the ones that specialize early. And before I get into that, I do want to preface and say, like, you know, the early specialization argument is a pretty well known and profound argument in this field. I kind of, it's very situational for me. I do think that too early of a specialization is not good for anyone. And when I say too early, I'm talking like there's no like fifth and sixth graders that need to be specializing in a specific sport because they have, you know, MLB dreams or something. You know what I'm saying? Like that's just, we're getting ridiculous with that, right? If they want to play another sport, let them play another sport. Like, you know what I mean? But again, I think there are situations that early specialization isn't the enemy. It all just depends on the kid. Without getting too much into the weeds of that, yes, I do see some like asymmetries that are a little bit more profound, a little bit more maximized in those types of sports, meaning like the true, what I consider like the quote unquote true rotational sports. You know, every sport's rotational to an extent, but like the true rotational sports, the softballs, the baseballs, the golfs, those sports where rotation is extremely prevalent in almost all movement, and it's barely highly intensive in its prevalency. I see a lot of asymmetries when the athletes do nothing but that from a really, really young age. That's why I think like the most important thing in order to make sure an athlete doesn't develop issues with that is to get them into a good, solid foundational strength program that is responsible and not negligent at a very young age. Because if they are going to specialize, again, like that's not, to an extent, that's not the issue. It's what are they doing outside of their sport if they are specializing. That's why early specialization, or the lack of early specialization, is so attractive to me, like as a coach, or even like as a father, like trying to raise a kid in this general sports environment. Is like, okay, well, like, the middle school years, for example, that 10 to 13 age, extremely developmental, like so highly developmental. Like if you don't count like the infancy stage of life, like arguably one of the most developmental stages in your entire life. Hormones changing, body's changing, everything's changing in that like 10 to 13 range. And so with that being said, if all that 10 to 13-year-old is doing is rotating to the left, rotating to the left, rotating to the left or to the right, whichever is their dominant side, rotate over and over and over again, and they're not doing anything else, well, okay, you might be a relatively skilled baseball player at some point, but the injuries are going to show up eventually. And it may not even be, I would argue and say, like, the injuries aren't going to be from rotating. Your body's probably going to build the capacity pretty easily and pretty early on to rotate pretty well. It's going to be from doing something random that counteracts that. It's going to be from bending over and picking something up on your non-dominant rotational side that's going to end up hurting something, or diving or falling on that non-dominant side, or whatever the issue may be. That's where the injury is going to arise. And so that's why I think, like, if you're not going to be an early specialization kid, that's great. We cover some of those boxes just because your body's experiencing things through different planes of motion that you're, only that you're not getting in your specified sport. But if you are going to be an early specialization kid, the strength conditioning program is vital. Like, it's vital to longevity. It's vital. And of course, I say that it is situational. There's going to be kids that specialize early on and never have any issues. That's great. But the risks, in my opinion, are much higher. And so if you want to address those risks early on, the strength conditioning program has to be strong enough to where there's the knowledge and the non-negligence of putting kids through every single plane of motion, every single situation that they're not getting in their sport. The coach has to know how to fill those buckets, especially in that developmental age, for sure.
Okay, so that opens up quite a few avenues we can chase.
Okay.
Asymmetries, like you talked about, lateral slings, all that ties together. Rotational athletes just as much as any other athlete. I don't know that you can narrow it down to just because you're rotating your lateral slings worse. So we'll just look at it from athletes in a broad spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
These asymmetries happen. We're seeing the hip shifts. We're seeing some of these things. The more I temper kids and the more I work with kids that are battling this, the more I see where this could be leading to a lot of the non-contact injuries we see, and even maybe possibly a lot of the cramping in the calves that we see. I don't know if you've noticed that, or if I'm just trying to fill in a void that isn't necessarily there.
Yeah, you've talked to me a little bit about the cramping in the calves. That's actually something I'm pretty intrigued by. I haven't really noticed that. I'm not saying that it's not a rabbit we shouldn't chase, because it does make sense in my brain. But yeah, I want to preface too with saying, like, everyone's going to have asymmetries. I have asymmetries. You have asymmetries. Almost every athlete you come across is going to have asymmetries in some way, shape, or form. It's just, at what point do those asymmetries become a detriment to the athlete? And that's I think the main question that we as coaches have to answer, and we have to answer it and figure it out as early on as possible. And so, but no, I do think that, and we work with a lot of soccer players at APG too. Asymmetries happen there as well. Non-dominant compared to dominant legs, kicking so much on that dominant leg. Specifically, the asymmetry will happen in the non-dominant just because that's the plant leg. I mean, shoot, I was a soccer player my entire life, from the time I was 4 years old all the way through the time I was 18 years old. And I was a lefty. So they threw me on the left wing at a very, very young age, around the time when soccer actually started to get competitive and not just little kids running around chasing the ball. So maybe around the time I was like 11 or so, they threw me on the left wing because I was, usually one of the only ones that was left-footed on the team. So I played left wing my entire life. And once soccer got competitive all the way through, when I stopped playing, I played left wing. So that being said, and I attribute this a lot to soccer. Some of it is genetic, just the way I'm built too. But like my right leg, my hip external rotation, my right leg is basically completely blocked. My left side isn't great. Like I'm not going to act like it is. My external rotation, my hips is not great regardless. But my right side is significantly worse than my left side. And that 1000% leads to some of my aches and pains in low back, some of my aches and pains in my hip in general. Like when I squat, just from because I'm an old school guy in terms of squatting. So like I'm in the basement, right? Like I want to make sure I'm as low as possible. I'm a big strength through length guy. That's how I coach. That's how I train myself. Like that's how I am. That's how I've always been, always will be. You can't convince me otherwise. That's another rabbit hole we don't have to go down right now. But like when I squat, obviously I'm squatting pretty low as I can comfortably go. And so like the next day when I get next day soreness or 2 days after when DOM starts to set in a little bit, it's almost always that right side adductor just lights up. And I mean, it's not a normal sore. It's like a sharp pain sore. And I can guarantee it's because in the bottom of that squat, I'm pushing those knees out and I'm trying to hammer into that in range on that external rotation on that right side. And that right side doesn't like to do that. Right. So that adductor is just lighting up. And I feel it a little bit in the moment, like that day, 24, 48 hours after, it is brutal. It is brutal. But again, all that is to say, yes, I think that the asymmetries in athletes are real. I think some are worth addressing and some of it is not, especially in sports where it's going to be extremely prevalent, like baseball, like softball, like soccer, things like that. It is worth noting and it is worth noticing in athletes, specifically in females. On the soccer side, especially, females, we already know this. There's tons of research out there. If you don't know this, you can look it up. Quick Google search will find you a ton of information and research on it. Female, specifically soccer players, are going to be a little bit more susceptible to ACL tears. I think it's actually relatively easy to see some of the general red flags involved with that before it happens. There's a lot of, and I'm not going to sit here and say that like knee valgus is the enemy, because it's not. To an extent, it's not. If you see a female, for example, doing a broad jump, and on her broad jump, not her takeoff, I don't ever really care too much about the takeoff. The concentric action with the knee valgus thing does not matter to me in almost any situation, except if it's like if it's prominent on one side in a return to play type of situation, like a rehab type situation, then I'll pay attention to it. But on a normal, healthy athlete, I don't care about knee valgus on a concentric action in a jump or any plyometric or intense movement. I do care about it on the eccentric action of the landing. And so like if I'm getting a female do a broad jump, a lot of times, like if I program some extensive broad jumps in like a warm up or something, specifically with the females, I'll always just naturally, it's almost like muscle memory now. I'll just always watch for that knee valgus, especially if it's dominant on one side or the other, because dude, I'm telling you right now, I've not been in this field for very, very long. I'm not sitting here acting like I'm a 30-year vet that has tons of experience looking at this stuff and doing all this. But I will tell you right now, almost every single time I see an asymmetry with that knee valgus on a landing of a somewhat intense to highly intense jump on a female athlete, that is a major red flag for me, because I think probably over 60% of the time I've seen that, where it's noticeable on a female athlete, they've almost had some type of knee issue. Maybe not always ACL, but some type of problem. I mean, I've seen kneecaps dislocate. I've seen patellar issues, like, PCL issues, meniscus issues, like almost always. So like I always look for stuff like that. And this is getting extremely long-winded, and I apologize. But again, all that is to say, yes, the asymmetries that need to be a concern are there, and it is 100% due to a whole lot of sport, and maybe not enough of, not even just strength training, just not enough of not the sport that you're playing. You know what I mean?
So you're down a road that I have noticed a long time ago, and me and Brandon Bird have had this conversation multiple times, and he's the one that kept me pursuing the idea that you're pursuing. But I noticed it in box jumps is where I first started noticing. When they hit the top of that box, what does it look like? Because now I know what I need to do in the squat rack. I've since taken that a little bit further with the tempering. And when we're talking asymmetries, what I've noticed is in athletes, one side will be shorter than the other, and sometimes very dramatically. And we just assume that one leg's longer than the other. I don't believe that's the case. I believe it's fascia tightening up in the sling. Well, then now you've got one leg, let's say in the broad jump, you got one leg hitting before the other. So is that where some of that comes in? Now I don't know. I'm always going to refer to strength first and then refer to balance second. But I think, like you're saying, let's say that you were a left-legged kicker. Well, then I would almost guess your left leg was shorter than your right leg, just because of the way the sling works and the way you're kicking. So now all of a sudden, your right leg is just eating way more force all the time than what you expected it to do. And then now we have these issues. So I don't know. The longer you're in this, the less answers you have, I think.
Like going back to soccer players specifically, if you got a lefty, and I agree with you too. Like I really like the lateral sling concept. Obviously, like we know there is some warrant and some weight to that. And so I think you're correct in that sense. Like that lateral sling does play a part in some of those, like quote unquote leg shorter, leg longer things. Obviously, we know like the leg's not actually shorter or actually longer, right? It's other things that's causing that. And I don't really think that like that's incredibly uncommon in general. It's to what extreme depending on what the sport's doing. That's exactly what you're saying. And so like take a left-footed soccer player, right? You got to think that right foot is the plant foot. And so just think about the massive amount of course, like everyone looks at if I were to run up to a soccer ball right now and kick it with maximum effort, like I'm at midfield and I'm trying to absolutely beam that ball at the goal all the way from midfield, right? That's going to take a maximum effort kick for the most part. If it's going to be a powerful, low hanging ball, not just a loft into the goal. So everyone's going to look at that movement and think, oh shoot, like it's crazy the amount of force that's being put into that left leg right there, like making contact with the ball. Like that is such an intense amount of force. The force output's got to be crazy. No one thinks about the right side. And that's really where the force output's happening, because think about the right side. As soon as you plant that right foot into the ground, the right side's responsibility there is to plant, stabilize, and let that left side rotate around that right side hip through the kicking action. It's really the brunt of the force. And so if you have an athlete that's doing something like that on one side primarily over and over and over again, especially in today's world where we play constantly, like, I mean, volleyball is a big problem with the club volleyball plus school ball and being doing way too much all the time. Soccer, or not soccer, but baseball, softball, big problem too. But really it's just all the sports, man. Like soccer's a problem with it too. Basketball's AAU is ridiculous sometimes too. Like it's all the sports in general now. Some worse than others, of course. But like if you're doing that on one side and that right foot, if you're a lefty, that right foot just taking so much intense force. Cause I mean, at that point, like you got to think of it. I think Dan Cleather described it this way in his book, Force. I don't know if you've read that, but you need to. I would recommend it to anyone. It's one of those really hard reads. Maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know. But it's one of those really hard reads that kind of takes you like 25 minutes just to get through a couple pages, because you're trying to like really, really break it down in your brain. And my brain, again, is just not that intelligent. So like it takes me a long time to break it down. So it's going to be a long read potentially for you, but the information is phenomenal. I think it's him in that book that describes force as, there's force in the ground coming upwards at us, and there's force from us moving toward the ground going downwards. And so really like force, the way I describe it is like force isn't quote unquote like absorbed into the body. So like that right leg that's planting when you're about to kick, it isn't technically like absorbing force. It's doing more than that. It's a force fight between your foot that hits the ground and the ground, because the force from the ground is actually moving upwards because the force coming down from gravity and your leg is moving downwards. So like think of the massive amount of intensity just the pure wattage that's being put into the ground just from that plant leg on a singular kick. Now imagine doing that 100+ times every single day, and think about what that's doing to that one singular side, not just from an ankle, a knee, and a hip standpoint, but from the entire side in general. So like, yeah, again, long-winded answer, but like you and I are on the exact same page here. There's definitely a deeper conversation and a deeper look that needs to happen into some of these sports that have very, very obvious and common asymmetries like that.
I want to get into this in low back because I know I heard you talk about this and the low back problems we're seeing with athletes. But before we do, and before I miss the chance, the other question I kind of had in there was we see 13 to 17-year-olds playing so many games. They're not necessarily strength training like we would like for them to. Do we miss that window to develop the neural adaptivity to create force? So is that window kind of finite? So when you're 17, 18, you're building some strength, but at the same time, you're trying to build force. So let's say you're trying to move a weight, you're trying to move 60% of your max, you're trying to move at 0.8 meters per second. As we get older, do you see that gets harder to do because we missed it at the maturing stage?
Yeah, that's a tough question, man. I think, and this is not the sexy answer, but I think it is very situational. I think a lot of that is going to come down to the athlete's genetic ceiling. Now, I will say that even if an athlete has a very high genetic ceiling, if some of that stuff isn't addressed, again, in a responsible and smart way at a young age, that genetic ceiling naturally is going to start to lower as they get a little bit older. So maybe. But again, like it's so situational with stuff like that, man. Like it's just so situational. Again, I know that's not a very sexy answer at all, but I mean, it's the best one I can give you. I do think that some of it has to do with what you're doing with the athlete at a young developmental age. Some of it is just simply genetic, and some athletes are going to respond to things better no matter what age they are, depending on that ceiling, honestly.
And I could agree with that. I think your twitchy guys are always going to they're always going to have that neural drive that a strength guy doesn't have. The more I look at it, the more I'm like, okay, what are we leaving on the table? I know you get deep in a DB hammer, and force production really doesn't matter until they have enough strength to actually create force. So you've got to develop that in there somewhere too. So you've got this whole balance that we're playing with from the time they're in junior high to when they leave us to go to college or whatever the case may be.
So I'll build on that right there though. And I will say, like, whereas a strength base does allow for more proper and efficient force production, you got to also think of it this way too. Like, no matter what, that athlete is still having to produce force in their sport. So I would argue and say that, like, at a young age, the technical aspect is really, really important, because if you start building, like, let's say you have a 13-year-old who is a training age of 0, never trained before, never been in a weight room in their entire life. But they're a pretty good athlete. Okay. They move around really well. They're naturally elastic, naturally twitchy, whatever way you want to call it. Right. They're kind of bouncy, springy. Okay. Well, they're producing a decent amount of force, even if they're, 100 pounds soaking wet, like they're producing a good amount of force just because their genetic makeup has allowed them to be naturally pretty elastic and springy. So yes, 100%. We want to build a solid foundation of strength to adhere to that force and just promote that force in a more safe environment for that athlete. And of course, the force production will go up as strength goes up as well. I will say, like, athletes like that, and I see this a lot, like athletes like that are way, way more susceptible to injury at a young age. And when I say injury, maybe not like serious injury, but like the nagging ones. Like, I think, going back to the low back thing, I think we're about to get into that too. But like, I think that's one reason why we see some of the low back stuff is like some of these athletes are so twitchy sometimes and so elastic sometimes, and their body doesn't know how to control it and hone in on that to an extent that, yes, strength is a primary answer for some of that, but some of that is to just the technique balance of it as well. Because if you've got an extremely twitchy athlete, that's one reason why I love I love training sprint mechanics. Some people are, kind of like, oh, well, if it's a team sport athlete, they're not a track runner. Like you don't have to dive too deep on the mechanics. And I agree to an extent, but I think also to an extent, like the mechanics need to be taught in order to allow them in their most developmental stages to start learning how to properly expel the force that they are capable of producing. Because especially when you got a highly twitchy, highly elastic athlete like that from a young age that has a high genetic ceiling, and that force starts to go up as that strength starts to go up and yada, yada, like, okay, well, now if the technique isn't there and the efficiency isn't there, well, again, you're going to start running into the Achilles tendinopathy, the patellar tendinopathy, the this, the that, things of that nature. It's just going to be confidence depleters for these athletes. And then all of a sudden they're going to be labeled as injury prone and blah, 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 So yeah, I wanted to, that was kind of a side note there, but that kind of got my gears turning on that when you said that. So I wanted to throw that in there too.
Yeah. Feel free to add on to all of this. That's the point of these conversations, is to get somebody else's opinion and see what they're seeing. Because what you see may be nothing like what I see, or I may just be seeing something wrong. But to head back into that low back, me and you've talked about this a little bit. And I noticed it years ago, kids come in and they're like, my back. And we're sending them to physical therapy for low back issues. And the only thing I can kind of deduce it to is maybe that we're playing so much quad dominant, hip flexor dominant sports that we're actually creating an anterior pelvic tilt and creating stress on that low back. And if we don't start balancing that, we're going to start seeing bigger issues, especially when they sit all day as well. You're not developing some of those muscles that we used to develop when we were up and moving and doing other things in life. I don't know if that's why you think we're seeing low back pain, or if you have a total different reason why we're seeing it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can agree with you. I think one player in the low back pain epidemic that we've kind of entered into in today's world that no one really talks about as much as they should is just the recovery and nutrition aspect of it. And this is just, again, just like you said, maybe this is specifically my population and other people don't have this issue nearly as much. And if that's the case, then I don't know. But like I talk to some of these kids, and this isn't just like the kids that I train currently. Like I'm talking about kids over the years. Talk to them and ask them simple questions like, hey man, like, what'd you eat for breakfast this morning? A lot of time it's nothing. A lot of the time it's just something completely random, a freaking frozen waffle or something. Hey man, what'd you eat for lunch this morning? Well, I had just some French fries, baked potato chips, Coke, whatever. And again, like, I'm not sitting here saying that that is the only reason, because kids have been doing that for a long time too. Like, like this isn't a newfound thing where, oh, the kids are eating junk food nowadays, but 25 years ago, no one ever did that. Like, no, I mean, of course they did, but I think it is a whole lot more prevalent now. I think it's not talked about nearly enough. I think naturally 25 plus years ago, food was organically just more healthy than it is now. Everything is processed now. Literally everything is processed. It's almost hard not to find things that are processed now in some way, shape, or form. So it's like, okay, I think that plays a part. I also think just the general lack of recovery plays a part now. Screens are obviously a whole lot more prevalent, and I don't want to be that guy. Like I really don't. Like I don't want to be that guy that's like, oh, you need to, stay off your phone. I hate to be like that, but also because of the prevalency of having access to different modalities like that now, I think sleep quality's gone down. You can't imagine the amount of athletes just like, yeah, I went to bed at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. last night, and then had to get up at 6:30 for school, and then they, like you said, sit all day long for a 7-hour day at school, and then they go and play the sport that they play every single day of the week, and so yeah, I mean, it's a culmination of a lot of different things, I think. But I think the one thing that people don't talk about enough in this field in regards to low back, or really just any chronic pain that we're dealing with nowadays, because I see a lot of hip flexor, I see a lot of adductor too, is just the general recovery and nutrition aspect as well.
Now, this is one I've been wanting to ask somebody that has a similar background to me. Okay. This is where I struggle. So working across party lines, let's say, private to public. You're working with kids that go to a high school. They have a high school strength coach. You were a high school strength coach. Now you're working with them privately. How are you able to break down the lines and work together with whoever they're seeing during the week?
Yeah. So a lot of that is because initially when I got into the private sector, my initial thought was coming from a high school and being a high school strength coach. I'm like, okay, I want to talk to all the high school strength coaches and I want to make sure I know exactly what they're doing with their athletes. So when their athletes come to me, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And the fact of the matter is, yes, that is awesome. That is extremely valuable. But as you probably know, sometimes it's just not feasible to do it that way. It's almost too much to try to do all of that and keep all of those different programs in your head as you create your programs for those athletes and blah, 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 blah. So what it really comes down to is the communication with the athlete. So every single day an athlete walks in, I have to tell them, all right, hey, look, number one goal here, you've got to communicate with me about how you feel, what it's making you feel like as we do things. Like you got to communicate. Like you are not going to be a successful private strength coach, or honestly, like even a strength coach in general. Let's be real. Like you're not going to be a successful strength coach if you are not being transparent with your athletes about, one, what they're supposed to be feeling and how they're supposed to be feeling it, and not allowing them to be transparent with you about how they receive that feeling. So for example, like if an athlete comes in and let's say they trained with their team at school, lifted, did speed work, whatever it may be, and then they had practice, and then they come to me. Okay, well, they come in, they're dragging. Like the first thing you do, coach, I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I'm sore, like I'm hurting. Okay, well, there's a bunch of different options here, and it's all going to depend on, one, the athlete, two, where they are in their season, all right, and three, kind of what they've done leading up to where they are right now. And that's that day, that week, that whatever in general, the past few days. Okay. So you can go a couple different routes, and I'm literally in the process of kind of making this for APG right now. Me and Alex are kind of heading this right now, but we're going to come up with like a injured/fatigued athlete protocol. And we're going to have different means of directions to go if an athlete comes in and says, hey, coach, like I'm spent. Like my central nervous system is completely shot. I feel like crap. Everything's heavy. I'm not moving well. And so it's like, okay, well, here's our options for speed. Okay. There is what I consider an avenue to go where you can still do speed work, but it's strength-based speed work. So even if your CNS is functioning at 50%, which, by the way, like I don't want to act like I'm one of those like CNS gurus that's like, oh, if your CNS isn't at 100, we're not training. Like it's not. No, like we're going to train through some subpar CNS activity, because you're going to have to learn how to do that anyway, right? There's plenty of things we can do. If they come in and their CNS is spent, there is still some speed work we can do that I deem very, very valuable. I call it strength-based speed work because it's going to be like heavy loaded sleds, looking at specifically like acceleration work. We're looking at shin angles. We're looking at things like that, shapes, things like that. We're really hammering home those aspects. So like heavy sled stuff, resisted sprinting. We're fortunate enough at APG to have a shred mill. So we use the shred mill in regards to that type of stuff a lot. Gear 2, gear 3, gear 4 work on the shred mill, where even if they're not moving incredibly fast, well, at least we're working on shapes and angles. So you can do that stuff with speed from a conditioning standpoint. You know, if they're out of season and they've just done something like they've come off of, you know, a team lift or whatever, and they're extremely sore. Let's just say they've destroyed their lower body, and you know, speed work isn't going to be beneficial. Any type of plyometric stuff isn't going to be beneficial, but they're in an off season. So we can start to do some conditioning work. There can be some extensive conditioning options there, right? Some tempo stuff, some stuff like that. I'm not anti-conditioning by any means, depending on what the athlete needs and where they are in their year. And so there's that option. We can go, if they are in season, like we have some soccer girls that do this right now, specifically on game days right before games. Like I'll have full blown mobility days built out for them. Some coaches kind of look down on stuff like that. And they're like, oh, well, that's just the easy way out. Like, well, but if the athlete needs that, they need it. What's the problem with it? Like, if an athlete is tight, sore, and fatigued, their range of motion is probably way less than what it normally is on a typical day. So some mobility work is one, going to make them feel better, which two, going to up their confidence in how they play and how they move in general. And three, it's going to be beneficial because they're going to regain some of that range of motion back that they've lost doing whatever they're doing to make them feel that way. So like we're going to have mobility days built out for them. So again, all that is to say, like, you just got to have certain plans and certain priorities built out for when these athletes come in and say, hey, we did this at school. I feel this way. Where can you meet me? And you got to be willing to meet them where they are to an extent, right? To an extent. You got to still be able to push them. You got to still be able to do this and that. We're not breeding soft athletes here, but you got to meet them where they are at. And that comes down to the communication specifically between the athlete and you. Mainly, you got to trust the athlete and they got to trust you in order to communicate properly.
Before we run out of time, I want to make sure that we get this covered because you were on vacation and we were having a phone conversation about how we were going to set this up and different things we are going to talk about. And you let me know that your mom was deep in dressage. So for anybody listening that doesn't understand dressage come about clear back with the Greeks and has worked its way through, but essentially it was the art of developing war horses that is now turned into an event where we've seen it like the Lipizzaner stallions and stuff like that if people don't quite have that idea in their head. So your mom does that, which is a very high level of horsemanship. So through that, I had you pick her brain. We kind of went through you as the mouthpiece to her on straightness, forwardness, and where the drive comes from in horses and how that would relate to how she would possibly view athletes. I don't know. I don't know what all of her answers were to some of that, but what did it seem like to you? Did it seem like maybe I'm onto something with some of these ideas, or am I just way out in left field?
Yeah, man. No, it was actually really cool because like I said, we had this conversation when I was on vacation. So I wasn't really in a spot where I could, have a long conversation with her in person or on the phone or whatever. But I did text her as soon as we got off the phone. I was like, hey, I just had a really interesting conversation with a guy who, knows a lot about horses and has dealt with horses for a really, really long time through cowboying and rodeo or whatever it may be. And he kind of has this idea about how he's used horses and their gait cycle and just everything along those lines and how he kind of applies that to coaching athletes, specifically like on the speed side. And I think like the example you used, and you chime in here anytime you want to make sure I don't want to say anything wrong, but the example you use is like kind of, when you're breaking a horse and that horse is on a lead line, right? And you're trying to get them to turn left or circle left, how that can kind of be similar to like a curvilinear run, like in an athlete, right? The way you kind of teach that horse on how to do that is very similar to basically how you teach an athlete how to do that and how to, get their bearing straight on the ground and leverage in the way that they need to do. It was funny because she was like, wow, would have never put those two and two together. And she even asked me, she was like, well, what do you think? Like, what do like, what are do you think that's applicable? And I mean, and I said, like, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me. Like, I would have never put that together either. But yeah, no, she was like, wow, that's actually really interesting. Like, I never would have put that together. But I want to hear you explain, like you did on that phone call to me, explain exactly what you're talking about with the lead line and the horse and circling left, because that's what I want your viewers to hear. Because even if you don't know horses, because I mean, like, again, I've told you this many times, like I'm not a horse person. I just grew up around it. So it's like I have a general concept, right? I have a general idea just because I've seen it. But like, even if you haven't had this concept, it's actually really interesting. So I want you to kind of dive deep into that.
Well, this is what I've noticed, and it took a lifetime to get there with horses, so then it just clicked with athletes. But anybody that works with, and the easiest way maybe to explain this is, especially if you work with, let's say, a high jumper. So you're coming around the curve and you hit your J step in the high jump. Well, if you drift across your midline, it drives you into the bar. Well, now your jump screwed up. Same way in curvilinear sprinting. If you drift, if you're setting your foot over your midline, you're drifting away from the center of the circle.
Mm-hmm.
you're not going forward at that point. And I know that concept is hard to put into maybe a thought. Is forward's not necessarily straight. Forward's forward, straight, but forward. So if you're curvilinear sprinting and you're drifting away from the center line, you are no longer forward. And when I've noticed that with horses for years and years, the first step, and when you have them on a line, which is exactly the same as curvilinear sprinting, the first step you ask for, the first thing they want to do is they want to move laterally. And the drive comes from their front end, which would be the same as an athlete's arms. So if you watch an athlete run curvilinear, their arms are the first thing that almost kind of gets out of whack and starts leading them away from the circle. So you have to keep setting that up to where the drive comes from the legs. And the first step they make is with the legs. Horses, especially, the first step comes from the hind end forward, and they no longer drift. Same with athletes. When you get this right and you see it in an athlete, it will click and you're like, he's forward. And that's why I started using sleds and chains in the curvilinear, because it held them in so that they could learn to drive forward. You can't drift with chains. The chains will hold you in. So then now we're getting athletes that are moving forward through the curve and driving from their legs and not just swinging their arms and pulling them off. And then you start building your steps. And then, so now we're moving forward through a curve with no drift, and you start putting that together with track athletes and stuff like that. Now we're stronger in the curve. So when we hit that high jump, we're not drifting to or from the bar. That's where it all started coming together. And then as I was watching the curvilinear sprinting, you watch all these kids spin out. Well, why are they spinning out? They're spinning out because they lose forwardness somewhere in there, and they're drifting too hard and they can't grab traction because they're laterally moving.
Yeah.
That's where the idea came from. So if your mom listens to this, and she agrees or disagrees, you'll have to let me know on that concept.
Dude, no, I think it's so intriguing, man. I think it's so intriguing. It's just so it's and this, maybe this is corny, I don't know, but like, it's just incredible how the good Lord has made all of us, meaning humans, animals, and whatever other life form, just so different, but also the same. Like, it's crazy the parallels that you can find in minute details like that. It's pretty incredible. So like, it's super intriguing to hear you talk about that. And again, maybe it's just because like I did grow up in that environment where I know exactly what you're talking about, and I can see in my brain like what you're talking about. Maybe no one else finds it interesting, but I think it's extremely interesting because I never would have made that connection. So it's really cool. It's really cool.
The one other aspect, and I slowly put together, and this is probably more that you could talk to your mom about than maybe the audience, but in dressage, the idea is to get that back hip driving and get it in up underneath them so that they pick themselves up, so that their back is almost like an arch, almost like a cat back. And then now you can start directing that force, right? That lifts the front end up because the hind end's driving, and now you can start directing the front feet where you want them to go. What that would compare to, in my mind, is when you get the top speed, start looking at where your athlete's hips are. Most of the time their hips are back. So now they can't do anything because they can't get their knees higher because their hips in the way. They can't adjust where their feet are going because they have something blocking them. So when you like have them do overhead sprints with PVC and things like that, and the hips drive in underneath them, and you see them get scared and slow down because they've never ran like that, that's the same concept of dressage in a nutshell. Is you are starting to learn to get them to come under themselves to create drive where they can direct themselves in a forward straight manner.
Yep. Dude, that's a beautiful explanation, honestly, because like, how often do you see that in an athlete at top speed, right? Where the hips lag behind and the head's forward, right? And that's literally how I cue it up to athletes as they finish a top speed run. And if that's what's happening, they come around and I'm like, all right, hey, if your hips lag behind where your upper body is proportioned, you're not going to have nearly as much front side mechanic ability. So your knee's not going to have nearly enough drive. You're basically just limiting your force output, which is going to limit your speed for obvious reasons. And that's not even to mention that if you're limiting your front side, you're probably not going to get down under your hip very well either. So at that point, we're probably going to have an early foot strike, probably with the heel, which is going to allow us to pull the hips through rather than push the hips through, which of course, like you just said, we're trying to get under our hips so we can push rather than pull. Pushing is always going to be more force applicable than pulling, especially in a sprint. And so like, yeah, I think that's a very, very neat. I don't even think that's just for me, man. Like, I think your audience will get a lot out of that too. Like, whether you deal with horses or not, like that's just a very, very unique way of seeing things, but a very valid point. So whether you know anything about horses or not, we do know about athletes, and the common problem you just described, you will see in an athlete on a daily basis, at least one of them. So no, I think it's extremely applicable. So props to you on noticing stuff like that.
Well, that's why I think the knee up cue is it's not a good cue, because it's impossible to do if your hips are not in the right position.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Couldn't agree more with that, man. Couldn't agree more.
Man, I know you got a kid that was taking a nap, and he was amazing. He slept through this whole thing. So before he wakes up and throws everything into chaos, we can kind of wrap this thing up. But I'll hit you with one more, and we'll go there, and then maybe we'll beat this nap out. But what was the driving force in going private over public?
I think one thing that really, really hits home with me about private is that in the school setting, when you got, I mean, dude, when I was at Good Pasture, I would have anywhere, some classes I would have 30, in there. Not too hard to manage, like, but it gets hard to manage when you got 30 in there and the kids are spread out amongst 5 different teams, and 2 of those teams are in season, 3 of them are out of season. Well, then it gets really, really hard when that 30 turns into 90 and you're still spread out amongst 5 different teams, 2 of which are in season, 3 of which are not. And then not only that is some of those kids on those teams are 8th graders working out with seniors, right? Like you're never going to have an English class with 8th graders that are in the same class as seniors who should be taking AP English. That's not a thing, but it is a thing in our field. So when you're in a setting like that, no matter how good of a coach you are and how good your program is, you're always extremely limited because of the constraints you're having to work around. It's less of how good is your programming, how good is your training, how good is your coaching, and more of, okay, well, you better be a dang good manager of a room, because if you're not, someone's going to die. And so I think that's the biggest draw to the private sector is, okay, yes, I'm still working with a group of kids, but instead of 80, I'm working with, I might have 10 in front of me who are all the same general age, play different sports, right? Have different needs, but there's only 10 of them or 5 of them or 8 of them. And I can spend time on each one individually every single time. So it's like my brain opens up to a whole new plethora of knowledge. Like, and I even tell the kids this every once in a while, like, all right, hey, congratulations. You get to be my guinea pig today because there's something I want to experiment on. I personally love it. I've tried it on myself. I think it's really cool. I need you to understand it. And I need to see if you feel what I feel. And if you do, that's awesome. We're going to apply it to the next block of training. Right. It's hard to do that, man. In a setting like I mentioned previously, like you can't do some of that. So like in the private setting now, man, it's like my strength coach brain gets to open up to this whole new world, because like I actually have the ability to do it. Of course there's still constraints, like there's going to be constraints anywhere. It's not the same. It is not the same. And I think that's the biggest draw, man. Like that is 100% the biggest draw. I feel like I can be the coach that I want to be because I don't have to just be the manager of the room constantly 24/7.
And you're dealing in most cases with kids that want to be there.
True.
Their
very,
athletic,
very true.
Yeah, their athletic ability may still be low and you're having to help them find that, but at least they understand that and they're trying to create it, as opposed to, you have a class now with kids that are very interested, and you have kids that are totally disinterested, and then now you're trying to mediate this huge gap in what you have.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%, 100%. Yeah, I'm very, very blessed. Like I said this at the beginning, but I'm very, very blessed where I am. Wouldn't want to be anywhere else. And it's been a change of pace. It's been an adjustment, but yeah, it's been incredible. Like it's been incredible, and I feel like me as a coach has grown more in the past year than I had in the previous 3 before that. So it's been awesome, man.
Coach, I can't thank you enough for making some time in your day. I know how busy things are, especially with little kids. So you got everything worked out. We got through this thing with barely even touching the notes. I mean, I had pages of notes, and we hit so many awesome rabbit holes that we didn't even have to use them. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Again, man, very humbled that you asked me on here. It's been tons of fun, dude. Can't thank you enough for having me on, man.
Well, thank you. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yes, sir. You as well.
Hey, Voodoo Power listeners. Thanks for watching and spending a little time listening to the coaches that we present on here. The channel has been growing because of community, and I really appreciate you being part of it. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button, leave a comment to let me know your thoughts, and share it with someone who might enjoy it. Those small things make a big difference in helping the channel reach more athletes and coaches. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next video. Thanks again for being here, and I'll see you on the next one.